Welcome, friends. It's Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. And I'm a little stronger this week than I was last week. We're talking about doing things to improve what we can as we age. So I was celebrating my year at the gym and more playing pickleball. So I don't know why that comes to my mind every time we start this. So that's fun. So today is our second part in our series of difficult conversations. I heard another way to say that is having courageous conversations. So the first week, last week, the first part was finding out about our own feelings about our aging or about our loved ones aging. So when we are in the conversation itself or having the conversations, that we are aware of our own biases or fears or things that may lead us off track or lead us into anger, resentment, uh, things that would not be in balance. So we try to do that first. Sometimes if we're talking with an aging loved one about their aging, we realize, oh man, this is not just about them and me being worried about them, but what that means to them, what that means to me, what my own aging means. So that was part one. So some people will be tuning into the replays here. So you can start with part one if you'd like, or part two is fine to just jump into in itself. So today we're going to be talking about how to have a courageous conversation with someone that we love. And typically it's about aging. It really could be any conversation, but we're going to be focusing on aging here. So I'll present some information and some ideas, and then we will have a conversation about it. We'll open it up to Q&A. And we've usually been going about 60 to 75 minutes. So you can prepare yourself. So I'm looking around the screen here and just really appreciating each one of you, and most of you I know and some of you I don't, so welcome. So where this journey starts is typically we love someone and then we start seeing signs that they're aging and we get concerned, and then our helpful heart wants to help or do something about it or solve a problem or make it better. And sometimes in the communicating that to that person we love, we might do it in a way that is doesn't build a bridge, and it could come across like from our ego, like we know better or we know what's best for them, or our solutions are much better. If you would do it my way, your life would be better. I certainly, had those thoughts myself, and I've seen it a lot with caregivers. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I will do that now. So my name is Cheryl Matthew, and for profession, I am a geriatric care manager. I've had my own business doing care management for over 20 years. And what that means is I help, usually it's adult children are typically the ones that call me because something has happened with their aging parent and things are not going along how they always had been. And oftentimes they'll say, well, my parent says that they don't need help. They're 85 and they are fine. They've always done it this way and they're fine. So these conversations happen often. And the gentleness into the conversations are a very familiar theme. Okay, so what are some topics that does anybody think of something that has come up for them that you've seen maybe in an older loved one that you want to talk to them about it, and it might be difficult? What would some of those topics be? And you can write it in the chat if you like. Might be a better way. And Karen can let me know what you're thinking about.
Peggy has her hand up.
Sure, Peggy, you can either write it in the chat or raise your hand.
Hi. You know, Cheryl, I don't know, I don't see on my screen how to raise my hand.
Okay.
I don't see the little hand thing. Anyway,
Peggy, do you see a reactions button at the bottom of your screen? There's like a little happy face with a plus sign.
yeah.
Okay, if you click on the caret that's right next to it, the little thing like this.
Up arrow.
It should give you an option to raise your hand.
I don't see it, but that's all right. I'll figure it out later. And forgive me, I had dental work today, so like my whole mouth is sliding to the side. And I'm sorry, Cheryl, please tell me your question again, because I
Sure. What topics have you come across that like this would be I need to have this conversation, but it's going to be hard? Something you see in a older loved one.
Yeah. I'm gonna take my mom. One of the hardest was her living situation. She was basically fine on her own, but she wasn't getting the care that she really needed. She had fallen outside, and you know, I was just aware that from my perspective, she wasn't safe at home anymore. And so I had to have that conversation with her, and I knew that it was going to be hard because she loved her home. And it was hard because she, like so many of, you know, children of parents, she didn't think anything was wrong. She thought she was fine. And I could see differently, you know. So I knew that the most important thing was that I just open a safe place to talk with her instead of, you know, you need to do this and that. And Cheryl, you even came up and talked with us. I just thought of that. You know, we brought her doctor in. You know, it's like there was information that indicated she wasn't, you know, safe at home. And then there was the emotional side of her, you know, if I put myself in her place, it would be a difficult thing to hear and a difficult thing to talk about. So, you know, through yeah.
That's a great, you have dealt with this so often, so you're giving the great it's like an outline of where we're going. So that's perfect. So so basically her living conditions, you were concerned with her living conditions was the biggest thing. Like and I might summarize that with, is she safe to be at home? Does she need to be in assisted living?
Yes. And there was one more part in that. Not only did I sense that she wasn't safe, but I noticed that there was like a level of what I would call forgetfulness, or, you know, you might call the beginning of dementia. She was starting to have trouble doing her checking account, and, you know, those little things that might look like, well, it's no big deal. But I knew differently, you know. So that was the conversation. That was the beginning of the conversation. And then at the end of her life, because she did go into assisted living, and she had had multiple TIAs, which are like small strokes from that beginning, till the end of her life. And she had made it very clear that she did not want to be kept alive with artificial feeding and all of that. So, she had, at the very end, she had one major stroke that was the beginning of the end. And at the time that she had that, she was not able to eat anymore because she would aspirate food, it would go into her lungs. So the conversation we had, I remember sitting with her and I said, Mom, I know that you don't want, any artificial means of feeding, which they call a G tube. And I said, if you do, we need to move you out of this assisted living facility because they didn't have the equipment to do that type of feeding. Or I said, or, Mom, what we'll do is we'll just keep you very comfortable and let your body die naturally. I mean, that was the conversation we had. And she chose to let her, body die naturally, which she did in about 5 days. So those were the two probably most, I wouldn't say difficult, the most heartfelt conversations I had with her about the subjects.
Thanks, Peggy.
Yep.
You've touched on some major topics, and other people have written in the chat too. So we talked about, does someone stay at home? Are they safe at home?
Yeah.
Are they going to go to assisted living?
Well,
Arlene said, if anything to do with death and dying, advanced directives, financial, and future planning. Karen's a choice my mom makes, have a direct and often detrimental impact on me and the family. And Teresa, my now deceased spouse. You could read the whole thing, but it sounds like you had some very difficult decisions in talking to him about choices during COVID. And then the beautiful thing, the solution was to use the Insight Sanctuary to talk with him successfully. That's beautiful. And all these topics, everything that you're bringing up is exactly where we're going today. So another main topic that is often difficult is driving. Is someone safe to drive anymore? Their memory, like Peggy had mentioned. Sometimes it's activities of daily living as what seems to be simple as walking, maybe their balance changes. Do they need home modifications? Their health. So overall, the goal in the conversation is to me, it's always been a common theme. I want them to be happy and I want them to be safe. And I focus on their independence. So as we talked about the first time, at the very first workshop, but we'll say it again, I see 5 stages in the aging process. So people go from living independently, they're doing everything by themselves. And then it goes to interdependent. So maybe they need some help from other people in certain things, but they still can live fairly independently. Maybe they need help lifting things. Maybe they need a ride to someplace if it's far away. So that it's a combination of support. Maybe neighbors are helping them out. Maybe you help them out a little bit. And then it goes to dependent. Someone gets dependent. So they need maybe 24-hour care to help them with a lot of activities of daily living. And then there's the crisis stage. So sometimes that means someone had a fall, broke something's in the hospital, or their memory impairment has gotten to the point that they're not safe. Maybe they're getting lost, and when they're driving, something has moved it into a crisis stage. And then there's end of life. So usually people will have the conversations with a loved one during a change in one of those stages. And sometimes it's in the gray area of they're looking like they're unsafe, but they're maybe not quite safe enough to do something yet. So when you keep those stages in mind and trust, this is a big thing that I've learned over 20 years, is that the next stage will become obvious. It will present itself. So many caregivers call and say, well, mom doesn't want any help, but she appears unsafe. She's had a couple falls, but she doesn't want any help. So we'll talk about this more, but helping the caregiver make a plan B, because eventually something's going to happen so that it pushes it to the next stage. But that they can relax a little bit, knowing that when the person needs more help, it will become very obvious. Sometimes that means they do have a fall and they can't get up. Sometimes it means they wander away and get lost. And there's different things like that, or they can't get up. They can't go from sitting to standing anymore, so they lose that independence. So that can bring a little bit of patience in knowing, is it time? Is it time now to have a conversation with them? And if you're asking yourself, is it time? It's probably time to have those early conversations, but it may not be time. It may not be a crisis time that you're worried about. That makes sense. So, and what we're talking about here today is the conversations and the allowing the person to have the dignity of their own choice, as long as they have capacity. And so this cognitive capacity, which I define as, do they understand the consequences of their behavior? So when someone has memory impairment, some dementia, Alzheimer's, sometimes we need to step in and help them with decisions. And that usually becomes very obvious too. But anytime before that, just keep in mind that people are allowed to make their own decisions, even if it looks like a really bad decision to you and me. It's allowing that person their karma, their choices that has led here, what their vision of the future is. And we can offer help, because sometimes they may want to do something, but they don't feel like they physically can anymore. Maybe they think, I need to move, but there is no way I can pack myself up and find a new place, and can't even imagine handling all those details. So we can offer help. Like, what if you just showed up at that new place and I handled all the things in between? So we can offer help, but it's still going to be their decision. I'll tell you a quick story when it really illuminates this point of giving the person the dignity of their choice. I was a hospice social worker like 20 years ago, and there was one of my clients was, I call him like a scraggly old guy, a scraggly old man, and a scraggly old dog. And this, like, the image of that is like very accurate. Like, he lived in a house, but it's kind of dirty. He just lived by himself. He didn't really care. He had this recliner and this really tiny television set next to his recliner, and he liked to watch baseball games there. And he had this little dog, and I don't know when the last time he had a bath, and he was just totally happy with this dog and his recliner. So in the process of his disease, he started being so weak he couldn't get to the bathroom. So he just, for a while, he just like had a can by his recliner, and he would, go there. And then eventually he became incontinent. He couldn't get up, and he couldn't use the can anymore. So he just started using the recliner. He just started urinating in his recliner. Well, the nurses would come in, the social work nurses, the hospice team would come in, and they'd say, "Oh, Cheryl, this is horrible. This guy's like sitting in his own urine. This is horrible. He could get wounds. It's going to get infected." They were thinking about the physical manifestations of, if you sit for a long time in your recliner, what would happen. But I talked to him, and I talked to his only relative who lived way up north from him. And offering, like, do you want to move to assisted living? Do you want caregiving in to help you? No, he didn't want anything. He just wanted to sit in his recliner with his dog and watch baseball. So I would help the nurses understand that's exactly what he wanted. And so they were able to give up like needing to move him or something and realizing that it was just right for him. I mean, it was so bad, like I would stand at the door to knock at the door to get in, and you could smell the urine outside. And I knew it wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to live there for years, which that helped. Like, what if someone would do that for years? So in a short time, and we allowed him to just sit in his recliner, and he died right there in his urine-soaked recliner with his little dog, and he was just happy. That's exactly what he wanted. Now there were a lot of other options we could have thought of to make his life better that we would have thought of, but we made his dreams come true and provided the end of life that he wanted. So that is is it an extreme case? That doesn't usually happen, but it's clear that it was his choice. Okay, so the just really briefly, often people will ask, why doesn't someone see that they need help? So there are reasons why we don't see ourselves aging. Some of it is psychological coping mechanisms, uh, our subjective age. Sometimes, well, most times, people have a subjective age in their head that they stay at. Mine used to be 27. I was always 27 in my mind. Now I have a 16-year-old, so I'm like 35. I think I'm up to 35. I had a person, a patient client with Parkinson's. He was like in his chair, he couldn't move anymore. I was talking to his wife about this concept, and he chimed in and he said, "In my mind, I'm 16," and he was probably 80, according to his birth certificate. Sometimes we use social comparisons. There's cultural differences. So there's a whole list, and with the time that we have, I'm not going to go into all of them here, but I will post this on our heartfelt resource page because it's interesting, and I think it will help understand maybe your loved one or even yourself. If you think, why don't people understand? Why doesn't my parents see that they're aging and they need help? So I hit some of the top ones, and then the other ones will be on the resource page. So for the conversation itself, I would suggest focusing on 3 C's. The first one is compassion. So be compassionate with yourself and your loved one. Curiosity, be curious. And third, clarification. So it's listening intently and clarifying. What I heard you say is blank. Did I get you? And sometimes they'll say, well, no, not exactly. And then they'll clarify it. So compassion, curiosity, and clarification. So we want to go into this conversation balanced and centered. So we come from the compassion and loving inside. I'm going to give you, we'll just go through a short exercise of how to do that. It's just one way to do it. So to bring yourself into attunement, could be you're going to go talk to your parents or your loved one, and you're in the car and you just do this real quickly. So it's just, you breathe in, you take a breath in, you put your hand on your heart if you like, and you breathe in love and you breathe out love. You could put your hand on your heart and say, Jerry used to have has a process where say, this one is love. This one is love. So as you breathe in love, out love. And then you can picture the loved one that you're going to talk to, and just recall a really loving memory of them. And maybe it's that loving that you tap into, and that's why this conversation is going to be so important to you. because you love them so much and you care about them. And check in with yourself to say, is this the time to do this, to have this conversation? So it can be that simple. Just breathe in love, out love. This one is love. So during the conversation, the most important thing is to be curious. Take small steps and ask them questions of curiosity. So it's what you're not going to want to do is come in and say, you know what? I don't think you're remembering things anymore like you used to. You forgot my birthday. You don't even remember my dog's name anymore. You're falling. We need to do something different, right? So those kind of things are not going to build the bridge and not going to bring you where you want to be. So I want to be curious. You want to let them know that you're on their side and that you support their independence. I want you to get what you want. You're important to me. And the third C is clarification. Like I said, did I get you right? So when we talk about the different topics, say one of them is driving. If you've been noticing, oh, there's some scratches and scrapes on the bumper of your parents' car or your loved one's car, and you're concerned, you can approach them from a place of curiosity. Sometimes this conversation starter is, I've been noticing my own aging. And at night, my vision isn't as good as it used to be. Or I find my depth perception is changing. Have you noticed that in yourself? Or if not, what have you noticed? And oftentimes just with claiming what you find in yourself and your aging process, or what you've heard potentially could happen as you age, it will get them thinking and like, oh yeah, that happens to me too. How are you feeling about your driving? So there's questions of curiosity. How are you feeling living in this big house? It takes a lot, to manage a house. I've been noticing that, what was fun to maintain my house is no longer really fun because it's just so much. There's always something going on and it's expensive and it takes a lot of my time and energy. Do you find that yourself? If you're visiting, you could ask, do you need any assistance before I leave? Do you need that dog food bag lifted? How about, can I help you take the trash cans out? You could ask, is there anything that you worry about? Is there anything that keeps you up at night? So that the questions of curiosity, instead of coming in with that, there's a better way. You're not what you used to be. And there's a better way, and I'm going to show you my way. So we come alongside the person, again, knowing that they have the right to make their own decision. So I'm curious if you've had a conversation, if anybody has an example of maybe something that a situation that that they need to talk to somebody about, and it's going to be difficult, or any questions, just kind of open it up at this point. Comments, questions. And Bertie, I see you said in the chat, my most difficult conversations are with myself these days around all of that. It's a really good point.
I have a question.
Okay.
So I'm really struggling with some of the choices that my mom's almost 80. She'll be 80 in April. And I I don't know that I'm really successful at going in with curiosity. I think I sometimes just go in with frustration. For example, um, about a year and a half ago, she decided to get a puppy. And we had a conversation about it. And I said, how about if we look for a dog that's already gone through the puppy stage? And she was like, okay. And then she dropped the puppy idea for a while. And then the next thing I knew, she shared with me a picture of a puppy. And I said, oh, whose is that? And she said, it's mine. And the challenge is I don't want a puppy, but when my mom can't manage the puppy or whatever else she creates in her life, then there's like an expectation from her that I'm going to come in and support her and, you know, take care of the dog or, do whatever needs to happen with stuff like that. And when I say to her, like, hey, this is a big house, it's a lot for you to manage. Is there some other way that you might want to, do you want to move? Do you have any other ideas? She like totally shuts me down. Like, no, I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. So anyway, that's what I'm struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is a very common occurrence, and part of that happens because of what we talked about. Is why aren't people aware sometimes of that they're aging and that they need help? So what I find is when some people accept a little bit of help, they think it's just all downhill from here. So they hang on to doing it their way for as long as they possibly can. And sometimes they have to crash and burn on their own and doing it their way. So part of it is to work with yourself and not going into over responsibility. And that's really hard when you see someone you love struggling, maybe trying to manage a puppy, trying to manage a big house, doing things that seem like they're a struggle for them, and that you think there could be an easier way or a different way, but allowing them the dignity of their own process and their own journey. So what I find are people are very resourceful. You think like, oh, how could you ever handle this situation, or how could you ever handle a puppy, right? And you're going to need some help, and I told you, blah blah blah. But all of a sudden, they might be on the phone finding a puppy school, or finding someone to watch their puppy, or they're creating the solutions. If you don't jump in and try to save the day or come up with solutions for them, they will find out how to handle it. And you go, wow, you really didn't need me at all. I didn't really need to be so, I didn't need to save the day. I just needed to leave you alone so you could solve that problem over there. And that feeling into that situation is not always easy. When do you step in and when do you not step in? And more I see that not stepping in is more often the answer, because that will, as I said, the next step will become very obvious when you'll need to step in. And so just letting that person deal with the results of having that puppy, or making whatever choice, managing a big house, having whatever commitments they have in the world, or living in an unsafe home, or whatever it is, like leaving them to that, and then helping when it's time, if that's yours to do. And that's a great question to ask yourself. Is this mine to do? And then either do it or don't do it. Because a big part of what I encourage caregivers to do is to be present in the moment, so there's no regrets later. Because our mind is really good at saying, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. So if you're present and you go, do I need to do anything with my mother with this puppy? right now in this example? And if your answer is yes, then make sure you go do that. And if the answer is not really, no, then that's the answer. So later you go, when your mind says, well, you could have done this. Well, she tripped over her puppy and broke her leg. Well, yeah, she did. And that was her choice. Her choices landed her there. And then she gets to deal with the next thing. Okay. Well, we call 911. Here, bring her to the hospital. And then we deal with that. So it's oftentimes it's for the caregiver is to let themselves off the hook of thinking they need to make everything safe and perfect and whatever it is, like thinking that all these things that we could do for them, which is great to do if they want the help. And when someone is that vulnerable and in need of help, it'll be very clear. You can see it on their face. They will ask, call 911 or put me in your car. I love the comment about, the difficult conversations are with myself and my own aging. That's so real and raw. I think we all go through that. And what's interesting is that I didn't, even though I've worked with older people, I mean, I've started helping my own grandparents when I was in my mid-20s, but I was always the young, helpful one. I could do that because I'm young and I have energy and strength, and don't I do that? And then, but I didn't really, it wasn't until I was like into my 40s and now 50s that I'm starting to have see the effects of aging on me, because even in the field and helping people with, go through these challenges, I still didn't see myself going through them. It was always someone else was going to be this age, or, someone else was going to be 60, 70, 80, 90, not me. And so I'm getting a different look as I'm getting older. And it was last year that I noticed that I kept telling myself, I need to keep in shape because I see what happens when people can't move around as well as they used to. So I was like, yeah, but I'm fine still. I wasn't noticing changes enough to do something about it. But when I started feeling different in my body last year, is like I got real. I had that difficult conversation with myself. Like I could see what this is. Could see where this is going, and it's not going to be the life that I want. I'm not going to have the independence. I'm not going to have the strength to travel or play with kids or dogs or whatever it would be. So I started working out and lifting weights 3 times a week. I found an accountability partner, and I lift weights 3 times a week. And I started playing pickleball. It's a social thing. It's outside. So I've noticed in the last year since I've been doing that, my balance is better, my mood is better, my energy is better. So these things where I thought, oh, this is just normal aging, have improved so far. I still have other things, like I've got lots of glasses and contacts that I wear. But having those difficult conversations with ourselves, like, where do I want to live? Who do I want to live with? Do I have my documents in place? Do I have my legal documents in place? My trust, my will, my powers of attorney? If I can't care for myself, who do I want to care for me? And those will change over time. So once you get those documents in place, you can change it if your friends change. Where do I want to leave my money to? If I have any money to leave at the end, who do I want to get my stuff? If someone says, if a loved one winds up in the hospital because of their poor decisions, we're impacted as well. Oh, that's so true. And Karen mentioned that too, right? And, that happens at any age. Like, choices our partners make impacts our life, right? If our partner's, not able to walk or not able to, I don't know, do something that impacts our life. So that happens at every age. So I would suggest that to remember that you always have a choice. Even if a loved one is in the hospital, you have a choice of how you respond and how much you give. Sometimes that means getting professional help in. So you don't have to do it by yourself. There's professionals, like I'm a geriatric care manager. There's geriatric care managers across the nation and probably throughout the world, but I know throughout the nation. So you could contact someone like that. There's a website, aginglifecare.org, which has care managers, and they'll help you through different things. But it is true that your loved one's choices impact you. And then the freedom you give them, you take to yourself. And that's really hard sometimes. You go, I can't come over right now. I know you need me to do this right now, but I'm not available. Who else can we call to help you with that? Now, sometimes crises do happen. And I think we all have that experience of you just rise to the occasion. You're like, is this mine to do? My loved one's in the hospital. Do I go to the hospital? Do I go pick them up off the floor? Sometimes there are times like that. And I'd say that's part of this making a plan B. Like, you know who to call. You have a care manager in mind when that happens. Or you know that there's a caregiving agency that can help. Or if it's a loved one and doesn't live with you, the neighbors around there that might be able to give rides or take them to the doctor's office. So there are ways to get help that it doesn't always have to land on you. You can ask yourself what's yours to do. Am I trying to be a savior? Or is this really something that I need to do? It is a tough call. I agree. Kevin, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hey, I'm listening to this, and I think I'm watching like what is going on inside of me towards just, there's a particular person I have in mind right now that I feel like is not necessarily taking care of herself that well, and some of these conversations are sort of timely to happen, relatively soon, I think. And so there's part of me that's like, yeah, I want her to have this experience. I want to have this experience. So it's like these expectations. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that there's a real practical side of me and sort of transactive that goes, well, and I have had this sort of conversation with her a couple of times in maybe not that an effective way, but, I said, so, just the idea that if you pass or if you go in the hospital, like the people that love you, like someone's going to need to deal with your stuff, so do you have a plan for that? Or how would you like that to happen? Do you want me to be part of that? And just sort of the idea, what I guess the question I have is it practical or workable, or maybe do you find it effective at all to have that conversation and say, what, in this case, I could do this if you want me to, but I need to know if you want me to do that. Like, I can help you clean out your apartment now and start getting rid of stuff that will help with whoever needs to deal with it after. Do you want that? And in some ways, I think that's sort of controlling, because it's like my vision of what should happen with her life or with her stuff, or the ease that I want to experience and that I want her to experience. So I guess I'm just wanting to put that out there, and like, what is your point of view about, talking about difficult conversations, like transactive, like, is this something you want, A, B, C, A or B, and then go from there. And then I feel like I've laid it out for them versus keeping it all sort of, hidden and not really talked about. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So I'll say first, sometimes it's interesting how much time can go in between the time that we first get a call from someone to say, I think this person needs help. Yeah, they need help cleaning out their apartment and getting a power of attorney and getting caregiving in there. And then sometimes it's like a year or two later that the next conversation happens. Like they don't do anything. They kind of hodgepodge, band-aid things together. And then maybe it's a year till we uh, have that conversation again. And they've done fine. You know, we could see looking back like, well, that wasn't a rush. That was just a step in what's going to eventually happen. So there's no rush. First of all, it is amazing how many times, someone will get my phone number and go, yeah, talk to Cheryl, create a plan. And then maybe they don't call for a year, or, you do a little bit of something, and then that person is patching together their own help and limping along, or it looks like limping. It's limping compared to how their life used to be, right? So they're patching it together, making it work. I think it's a great conversation. If you can have that conversation with someone, it's wonderful. And sometimes it takes a certain person to be able to have that conversation, and it's a certain person that can receive that conversation. Because some people, you might go like, if you, I've asked people before, like, if you knew you had like 6 months or less to live, would you want to know? Some people are like, absolutely not. I do not want to know. Okay, we won't talk about that. And some people are like, yeah, because I want to plan, I want to do things. So it's great to ask them the question, and ambiguously enough, I guess, to not, maybe let them, because if they don't want to know, you don't want to tell them. Like, if you had cancer and you're, I don't know, would you want to know? You don't want to give them that answer, because if they don't want to know, you don't want to tell them in the question. So you leave it, if there was something going on, would you want to know that? And it's a beautiful idea as far as like, hey, eventually, we're all going to need to handle the stuff in our house. It's going to go somewhere. It's going to go to someone when we're out of here. Have you thought about where you want your stuff to go? Can I help you with that? Do you want to give any of that stuff away, early? Because most people don't want it. Most people, whatever the psychological mechanism that is going on, maybe sometimes it's denial, defensiveness, whatever it is that they can't really think about their own mortality, that, we think, well, this is just going to keep going just like this. I asked my 82-year-old mother, is like, well, what do you think about aging? She was like, I just don't know how I got to this age. It doesn't make any sense to me. All of a sudden I'm 82. She just keeps living, just doing her life day after day. And all of a sudden here I am. So she doesn't really want to talk about, she's out there having a good time. She doesn't really want to think about the next step. But that's where we come in, going, the people that show up on these calls are at least able to consider these things. So that's where we think about plan B. So you could have the conversation with the person, and just make it be their choice. And then you have a plan B, knowing that you love them, and maybe sometime when they're either passed away, or maybe they need to move in assisted living, or something happens, that plan B will need to be put in place. For example, do they need home modifications? Do they need to move to an assisted living? Do they need help with their finances and writing their bills? Do they need rides places? Do they need some social engagement? These kind of things that we can keep in mind when the time presents itself. So we could talk to them about it. And oftentimes, as we said earlier, lead in with what you've been thinking about lately. I was at this seminar and we were talking about the legal documents that we need as we age. I need a trust or a will and a power of attorney in case I can't either handle my healthcare decisions or handle my finances. So you tell them, like, I went and, wrote those up. I saw a lawyer, or I got a power of attorney from the internet, Staple, so power powers of attorney for healthcare, like someone that's going to speak for you if you can't speak for yourself, say, for example, 5 wishes is something online you can fill out. You can buy them. You can, there's free documents online for the state specific. So there's things that you could fill out, and then you have that conversation with them. I was just doing this planning. Have you thought about it? And see where that conversation goes. When we come from a compassionate place out of curiosity, have you thought about these things? Have you thought about where you want to live when if you don't want to take care of this big house anymore, have you thought about, is there any other places that you've always wanted to live? No, you want to live here in your house. Yeah, I get it. People want to be home. And as things progress for the independent, interdependent, dependent, sometimes those, you'll have another window to talk to them about it. So if you could start the conversations early and often, so it might not just be one big conversation, it could be having the discussions over time, and then let them have their own choice. If you think about it, so someone is living in an apartment or a house, and they're getting older, and they've got a bunch of stuff, and they die. Somehow that stuff is going to be handled one way or the other. If they've got a lot of, if they've got money, their money will go to probate, the state will handle that. And so it'll get worked out. The house will be cleaned out. Like, if you don't do anything for this person, it will get handled. In MSIA, we talk about, completion and the value of that. So I think that, when I worked for Now Productions and MSIA, there were a couple times that JR had everybody on staff write down any incompletions they had. He wanted everybody just be clear. You didn't have to complete it. It was just write it down. And so when we think about, like, hey, can we complete our karma this lifetime and get off the planet? That would be an encouragement to someone, like, hey, are there things that you want to complete? And is there a way that I can help you? And then just trust it will work itself out.
That's
I
great.
hope that answers your question. And
Yeah.
and I think really appreciate yourself for having the loving kindness to be able to be willing to help a friend out or a loved one out. Someone else had their hand up. Anybody have a question? You put your hand down. We need a completion support group. Hey, I like that. Completion support group. David Allen has talked about, like, a mind dump, like taking everything out of your brain that's, a to-do list or incomplete, and putting it down on paper, and then decide, which of those you still want to do or not do. And it was interesting. We did it a couple times on staff with JR, and there were a couple things that stayed with me from one thing to the other, one time to the next. But most things were pretty much gone, but there was a couple things, and I just think that it seemed like just, karmic lessons for me to clear, and it was usually something I was thinking that I could clear myself, that I just had to call complete. It wasn't with stuff. It was like, oh, I always thought, I was supposed to do something with this person. Well, it was just an expectation, and I could just complete it. So people who know us well often see through those great sounding neutral questions. I'd love to hear more about that if you want to. Yes, so if I'll just speak to that. So great sounding neutral questions. I would think that another part of this is to be honest. And my honest, like I was saying earlier about my changes as I'm getting older, are very true. And they're also related to people's challenges that I've seen over time, as far as maintaining a big house, for example, or driving, things like that. So it could come across maybe it's like a leading question or like a neutral question, but it is really actually true for me. And offering the person like the dignity of their process. Like if they're not able to drive as well as they used to or see as well as they used to, for example, knowing like or letting them know that is really a normal part of aging and we all go through that. So normalizing the changes. The other part is with the curiosity, it's really getting to know the person that you're thinking about helping. Especially if it's a parent, sometimes our parents are off living their own life and we haven't really been involved with their day to day. We may not know them as well as we might. Maybe it's someone that comes on, say, in heartfelt, and it's a member of our church or community that somehow it's got on the radar like that person might need some help. And we may not know them. So the curiosity is to ask them questions about themselves. Hey, get to know them, even if it's our parent, getting to know them. Are there things that you've always wanted to do? Oh, I can't do that anymore because I can't walk. I can't da da da. Oh, if it's something that you really want to do, I'd love to. So for me, like I love to hear those kind of bucket lists because then I go like, if it's really important to you, let's make that happen. And that could be a really fun project. Maybe it's a trip they don't think they're going to be able to make. It's like, hey, I'll go with you. I would love to do that. I always want to go to the Grand Canyon. Hey, let's get on a train. Let's see if we can get some sponsors for the trip. See if we can get the money and go do that. I had speaking of the Grand Canyon, that's why came to my mind. I hospice social worker again I had a client and he was a truck driver and his route was from Los Angeles to Arizona, and his last stop was like before the Grand Canyon. And in all his years of driving the truck, he never went to the Grand Canyon. He never got there. So when I was talking to him, this was like within a month or two of the end of his life, what ended up to be the end of his life. And I was like, do you have anything that you have always wanted to do? Right? What's on your bucket list? Just coming up with ideas. It's like, well, I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. And so I checked with him and his wife, and I was like, well, if we made it work, it's going to be the kind of trip that you're going to have to answer. Are you willing to die trying? Is that important to you? Because if it is, I will help you make that happen. And both he and his wife agreed. It's like, yes, it's that important to us. So I got the hospice team together. We got them portable oxygen. I wrote to the Grand Canyon Railroad and told them the story. They gave us tickets for him and a caregiver to go with. We had a night's stay at the Grand Canyon Railroad area. They've got a hotel there. We got the train tickets paid. The whole trip was paid for. So his wife and a caregiver went. They got to see the Grand Canyon. The trip went great. They had portable oxygen all along the way. Got home, and he passed away within probably 3 weeks of that trip, and that was very exciting. So I love that. So with the being curious, and the only reason I found out about that was because I asked him questions. What have you always wanted to do? So I got to be curious about him. It wasn't like, I want to make you comfortable in this bed, or I want you to watch Jeopardy 3 times. You know what I mean? So I found out what he wanted and then helped him ask permission and made that happen. Another woman she was also on hospice, had a lot of great experiences on hospice. Because that's, to me, that's where life happens. People get real. We live our life, we're just cruising along, kind of on the hamster wheel. And then something happens, we're like, okay, we're either getting older, maybe we have a disease that's going to be life limiting. And people get real about, okay, this is the time. If I'm not going to do it now, I'm never going to do it. Things like that. There was one of my hospice clients. She had 2 daughters, and she always felt bad that she didn't finish high school. She didn't have a high school diploma. So this came out because I was curious, started talking to her, how are you feeling? So, and it was somebody that, wasn't declining as they normally would. And it was like, what is she hanging on for? So that's why I was starting to talk to her. I felt really bad, no high school diploma. And I was finishing my doctoral program, my PhD program at the time. So I told her, I am able to grant degrees. I made it up, but any of us could do this. I based on your life experience, we are going to get you this life diploma. So then I had her tell me her life experience in raising kids and managing the house and all these things that she did. It was like, those all qualify for the general education requirements of a high school diploma. And I made this ceremony. I wore my robe, and I made her a physical diploma, pictures of her and her kids. We had this whole ceremony so she could graduate with her high school diploma. And she passed away about 2 weeks later, and she was so happy. So again, those only came out because of being curious. So it doesn't have to be on someone on their deathbed, but it could be a fun time to have these difficult conversations, especially with your parents or loved ones. Like, hey, what you might find some things that you'd never thought about. See if there's anything else in the chat here. Anything else? Any other questions or comments before we bring this to a close for today? And I'll say next week we will talk about what it is that we like. What is the end result we'd like to have for these conversations? For example, what are the legal documents we want in place? What are the contact lists we need in place? What do we need from our loved one to make it easy for us, really, to help them get what they want, right? Do we have the contact numbers for their neighbors and their doctors? Do they have the medical powers of attorney, things like that? So we'll talk about those documents and also bring any questions you have for next time. Hi, Beverly. What you got for us? You're on mute, Beverly.
There we go.
There we go. Oh, you're on mute again.
Unmute. There we go.
There you are. Okay.
I got a little,
Huh?
sorry, I had a little sign that said, do I want to mute or unmute? So
Okay.
I'll make this quick. So I am the one who's getting the talking to this Friday,
Okay.
which seems so weird because I don't know how I got to 65. I'm still 17, but no, I think I might be like about 35 now. So,
Okay.
but what's so weird is that we had the POA stuff, and I did that all back when you offered the 5 Wishes class, but I've moved a bunch of times, and I've done a ton of downsizing just because of life circumstances. So the weird part about this is that I have 2 sons. My one son is very Catholic, and he's got this thing about me being cremated or having my body like done anything except buried. So I just, you know what, I guess I'm probably just asking for the light, because I need to figure out how to tell him that I'm not worried about that. Like, he's like, well, okay, so when Jesus said, when we raise up from the dead, where's you going to be, Mom? You're going to be, if you're doing it by the science, you're going to be here, you're going to be there. So I guess I just need a way to talk to him about that. And he's very, very forceful. He's very strong in his opinion about stuff. And so, and oddly enough, he's a therapist, which is kind of crazy. But the other one will go with pretty much whatever, my older son. And he is the main person in charge. and then my the one who's got this thing about me being cremated or whatever is second. So any tips on how to just approach this without getting into that too much? You know, like, I don't want to get into like this whole philosophical debate and theology debate and stuff. I just want to tell them what I want and not get lectured. So I'm
That's
asking
a
for light
great,
from everybody.
yes. Well, we're sending you the light right now. Right. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and we presented it as we're going to be talking to someone else, and then someone else that they're talking with themselves. And this is
Right.
another angle of I'm going to be the one being talked to. So
Right.
you can use these keys with the 3 C's, right, for yourself. And you could it doesn't sound like he's coming from a lot of curiosity right now.
No.
You might be. So you see how, we talked in the part 1 as far as what are our own attitudes about this getting older stuff, right? And so he has his own beliefs. So we all have our own beliefs. So first it's being on it, being clear with that. And so you could use the 3 C's with him, right? Even though he's talking to you, you could be curious. You can be compassionate. And you could be clarifying, like, oh, are you saying that if my body, like, you can be like, really, wow, so if my body dies and then I'm cremated, then you see that that's like this, like, understand his story, so he feels heard.
Yes.
So knowing that you are the one that gets to make your own decisions.
Yes.
And that's being wise with who you're going to pick as your power of attorney. So if you go, no, I'm really going to be cremated, that's what I want. And so you have the son that is going to cremate you. You pick whoever it is that's going to do your wishes. So that's part of what you have control over. So, right. So it sounds like when you said you don't want to be lectured to, can you be curious? Yeah, it sounds like it's, and maybe it's, you're modeling for him what a difficult conversation is like. It's like, oh, I'm just going to be curious. I mean, there's so many, divisions in the world right now. If we look like, wow, there's so many different beliefs. And if I come from a place of curiosity, I can go, oh, wow, that makes so much sense that you feel that way. And if you come from, he is my son, I love him, I delight in him, and we disagree on things, but can I just be curious and wonder where that came from? And so there's another level of, this whole is living and aging and dying is a family affair. There are things that, affect us all. Even though I can go like, it's my choice, I'm just going to do this thing because it's important to me. And some things we may be able to allow the other person to have some choice over. It's like, well, when I die, I do not want a whole service. I just want to be cremated. And, you can have a celebration if you want, but I don't want a service and I don't want this and that. And then you go, well, you know what? I'm actually not going to be there, right? I'm going to be dead. And are there things that are important to me? I'd really like these 3 things said at the service, but I don't really care. You guys can work it out. But then, maybe your sons don't even agree. So maybe some of your guidance will help them, or maybe you say, my wishes are, you can celebrate me however you do. So it is interesting, keeping everybody in mind. And it really comes down to what works for you.
Yes.
And it's interesting that he's, usually, I'm curious, you don't have to necessarily answer. And like at 65, I would guess that there's maybe not typically a situation that's happened so far that's like, well, I'm really worried about you. It's
Right,
just like he's
right.
worried,
Yeah.
which is cool. Like not many people pre-plan that far in advance, so that he's willing to talk about it. And so maybe it'll give him some time to process it also. So you start talking about it now. Hey, maybe just keep the dialogue open. You're curious, what are you going to bring to me?
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
And then just
Yeah.
can we just keep talking about this? Because it's really interesting to me. I hear that it's important to you that this happened. And I don't see it that way exactly, but I'm so curious and I really want, what's the experience he's looking for? Like some people in my family might say, well, like, I need you to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior because that's the only way, because I want you to go to heaven. And that's the way to do it. But maybe I
Yeah.
don't necessarily feel like that. Maybe Jesus is in my heart already and I think I'm going to go to heaven. So when that person's like, will you accept Jesus like this way? I need you to do it this way. If they keep hearing, like what they really want to know is that I'm going to be okay, that Jesus or loving, or I'm going to be in a good place, I'm going to be in heaven, whatever it is that they think, that's really what they want. And so
Yeah.
if I start communicating to them in little ways over time, those little things that could be a subtle thing like, oh, you know, that Jesus is always in my heart, or you say things like that, so they pick up on it over time, and they're like, yeah, you know what, I I wanted mom to be in a good place, and for her to be in heaven, and so when you eventually die, they can say like, yes, you're in a good place. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they know that. I mean, they've been around. I mean, like they took Children's Insight and the whole big
Yeah.
thing. I mean, I think you've even met them. They were little bitty guys, but now they're like the adults with their
Yeah.
kids and everything.
Yeah.
But so I don't know. I
Mhm.
think they're bringing this up because I did have some health issues that kind of continued on. But I'm on the other side of them. I'm getting, stronger, and all these different things are happening, and that's all
Mhm.
happening for a reason. So yeah, I feel like I am a little young for them to be bringing this up. I think they're just, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but that's one thing I want to ask them. Like, let me know what your fears are or your concerns. Like that's one
Mhm.
thing. And is that, I mean, that's okay to ask, right? I don't want to be putting them down or judging them. And I just want to go, I think their concerns are like, am I going to be able to take care of myself financially? Because this current situation has, the health situation has robbed me of my finances or drained me of my finances, but I have time to
Mhm.
rebuild. So,
Mhm.
so I guess that maybe that's it too. And the other question I have, I don't know if you know the answer to this. So this is only for Discourse subscribers, right? So they can't watch any of these, right?
It's really open to anybody. So
Oh, okay.
we are advertising it to Discourse subscribers now, and you can tell by some of the language we use, it has, MSIA teachings, and it's really open to anybody. So if someone
Okay.
wanted to watch the uh, repeat the recording,
Yes, recording.
it's yes, yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't get to do the last one. I was I was working. So I know I don't think they're recording.
They're not available yet. They're working on the YouTube channel,
Got it.
but
Yes.
they will be on the heartfelt.org website under resources, and then Aging Conversations
Got
with
it.
Dr. Cheryl, and then the recordings will be there.
Oh, okay. Great. Because
yeah.
I just want to say this one time before I go. I really loved what you said about being people's choices, like the story about the scraggly old man, and the way you just
Mhm.
allowed him to be happy. It didn't
Mhm.
matter, you know what I mean, how that went.
Yeah.
That's a really important point that
Yeah.
I feel like I need to discuss with them. So anyway,
Yeah.
so that's
There's,
great.
yes, that, and then plus you can let them know, like, I have my documents in place. I've got my power of attorney. I've got my trust. The things that we'll talk more about next week. But I've got my legal documents in place, and I'm going to create this checklist of contacts, important contacts. If you need my neighbors or my doctors, so there's things that can bring them some peace of mind, knowing that you've got things in place, and then that like, hey, my stuff is going to go here. So if you want to have that conversation, you know, where will things go, and that you've got things planned, And you may, they may bring up some really good points. And you can just
Yes.
say, you know what, that's a great point. I do not have an answer for you right now, but I'm going to go check. I'm going to check that out. It's a great point. I really
Yes.
appreciate you loving and caring for me. It's a very caring thing to do. Have that conversation.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think it is too. It's funny. It's funny and it's caring. So
yes, it is.
With my
It is
family
funny.
dynamic, it's funny, and it's good.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to get in on this particular one since that's happening Friday. So I really appreciate you. And I don't want to keep any more time because I know you want to wrap up here. So thank you so much.
Sounds
Good to see your face.
Thanks.
Okay.
Nice to see you. It's been a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it
Okay.
has. Okay. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Love you all. All right. Take good care.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us.
Okay. Bye-bye.